Welcome to Lightbulbs, the Entrepreneurship Club podcast. Today we're talking to serial entrepreneur and MBA student Aabhas Gaba. Abhas has a track record of building and scaling successful businesses. He founded Gabson Technology, a cell phone manufacturing company in India, in 2020 and led it to a successful acquisition for £5 million in January 2025. He's also the co-founder of Culsac, a marketing company focused on helping entrepreneurs grow their businesses, which he scaled from a 3-person team to a company of 14. Before the MBA, Abhas studied policymaking at the University of Oxford. Thank you, Abhas, for joining us today.
Thanks, Danny. I'm super happy to be here. Always excited to be part of the Entrepreneurial Club events.
It's a pleasure to have you. So how are you finding the MBA so far?
Oh, it's brilliant. Love the people, the crowd, the resources that the business school has. And it's great time right now. It's finally in spring, we're getting to see more sun. So it's just brilliant out here.
Yeah, except today. Today is not as sunny as it could have been.
Yeah.
So tell me more about how you ended up starting Gabson.
Okay, so for me, I belong to a business family, and growing up, it was always this spark around building businesses. My family has several, so I always had growing up this idea about, okay, how about I start something of my own, even though I was working in a job. So every now and then I would bounce off an idea or two with my close friends. And thanks to the scholarship funded education that I had at Oxford, I need not worry about loan anymore. So therefore I could take that risk appetite, and I think that felt the right time. And I stumbled upon manufacturing unit, and I spoke to the company for which we got manufacturing unit set up. And with my co-founder, it seemed like a right opportunity. We put in some money, got some loan, and started with a team of 5 initially, and then eventually we were over 60.
Wow, that's amazing. Also, not very common to start a manufacturing business while you're working full-time as well. So what were you doing when you were working full-time?
So I was previously working with the government sector. I had varied stints from working with United Nations, the World Bank, and management consulting in India. This was about helping governments design policies and execute government missions. So broadly, my career up until entrepreneurship has been in the public sector and strategy domain.
Do you feel like that's helped you recognize opportunities and be a more successful entrepreneur?
That's a good question. I never thought that it could well be a stepping stone, but I think looking back, I feel that the art of communicating with different stakeholders was one of the key factors. Now, I've had to navigate lots of different stakeholders, especially on the government side when designing a policy. So that actually helped me build my own communication skills, learn how to navigate different permissions when starting a business, talking to people right from someone who's a peon in the government building to a minister. So this all came handy when I started my own business. I had to recruit people who were not just sometimes unskilled. I had to train them to the factory manager itself. So I think that this was one of the key skill sets that came in handy.
I can actually see that because if you're working in a sort of government position, it opens your mind to how things work in the public sector and probably increases your risk appetite in terms of setting up a manufacturing business in India, which I imagine cannot be easy. I've only ever done e-commerce businesses, which are so much easier to execute. So tell me a bit more about Gabson. So what exactly was Gabson doing at the point you started? I believe you were initially manufacturing chargers, right?
That's right. So we started figuring out, okay, where's the gap? Because at that point in time, the government of India had this massive push towards Make in India. And we figured out that most of the companies here were firstly outsourcing their component manufacturing and then importing bulk of the things from China itself. And there was a gap clearly because the government had higher taxes on when you import an entire component, let's say the charger itself or the mobile phone, but less tax on if you just import components and assemble them in India. So I started with assembling first and gradually build on new products to now entire cell phone facility and based out of Noida in India. So I think identifying gaps, firstly, here was critical, understanding the tax ecosystem, which location might be relevant. For instance, for me, also for anyone who's trying to build, you would want to understand different tax systems in different states or even countries. So I had to weigh between starting a facility in Delhi versus in Noida, because both of them have different tax systems, different minimum pay grades as well. So that impacted our labor force. I think after analyzing this and then trying to figure out what the companies want, that's when I could connect the dots and see, okay, this could be a right thing to at least kick me off.
And I'm guessing the factory was eventually set up in Noida.
So I started with Delhi because that was a proximity for me from home itself. Mm-hmm. And then when we had to scale it up, that's when I thought it's the right time to shift to Noida because of synergies of the electronics sector in Noida.
I believe also there are special economic zones that have been set up in Noida as well. Yeah, so if you set up a factory over there, the government's just to encourage investment in those particular areas, you end up paying lower taxes. I think people who work out of those special economic zones or SEZs also have to pay less tax as well.
Yep, absolutely. And I think which obviously then impacts the overall company's bottom line. And then even the investors around the area and the companies around the area are also encouraged to like procure locally because again, it would save transportation cost for us and for them.
Amazing. And so you said you started this with a co-founder.
Yeah.
So can you tell me more about how you met him? What kind of skill sets each of you brought to the table as well for this business?
Yeah. So for me, I have been close with my high school friends since we left school, and both of us, especially one of my closest friends, he and I would always bounce off ideas. Okay, what do you think about this? And then both of us were also very excited about manufacturing sector as a whole. And that co-founder actually returned from Germany after doing his engineering. And so he was also at the same time in a situation where we both were having relatively low risk and probably stable source of income or savings. So I think just the synergies matched, and that's when we both started off.
Amazing. And you did engineering before Oxford?
So I actually studied urban planning, which was sort of architecture, city design, infrastructure, environment, a multidisciplinary ecosystem. That actually enabled me to, in fact, be able to speak the language of people from different sectors. I think that's something which probably relevant for a lot of generalists out there, being able to communicate effectively or speak the language of people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, I think as an entrepreneur, you're often just connecting people, connecting resources. And I feel like your background in the public sector would have also helped in terms of knowing, for instance, about the tax rules, about SEZs being present in Noida as well. So I feel like, there isn't necessarily that typical path of someone being from an engineering background, starting a manufacturing company, or someone being from more like a finance or a commercial background. And I think you're a good example of that. So how was the journey exactly? You started this factory initially, it was in Delhi, then you expanded. You make it sound like it was very smooth. I know it probably was not very smooth, especially starting somewhere around COVID as well. So how was that?
Yeah, I think this is absolutely right, Danny. Starting up in the middle of pandemic was probably not the smoothest ride. My second company was relatively smoother to at least kick off, because one of the things we faced initially was reluctance from the labor itself, factory workers, because 3 months into the business, the second lockdown was imposed on India, and the government had clear instructions to shut down businesses, especially where more than 5 people would gather at one point in time. And this was also the time when we had our first customer who became our long-term customer, and eventually we got acquired by them, and they placed our first order. This was massive for us, for the reputation of the company and also financially sustaining the company itself. And while their demand was very clear that they wanted roughly 10,000 sets of chargers every month to be delivered, and we were short of capacity. So this was right. I mean, the first order, we had literally 7 or 8 people hired, and people were hesitant coming out from their homes. So I think the challenge was not just convincing them to come out of their homes and build it, but also to then think of the entire supply chain, because a lot of components we had to import from China and then assemble them. So the logistics were also a challenge because there were barriers even for the trucks to come from port to cities. So thinking of those logistic channels, convincing people, thinking of the timing that they had to match as well, and getting government permissions, and then thinking of hiring more people at the same time, because every now and then there was news that, okay, this person again contracted COVID, so we had to let them go for a while. And in the middle of all of this, the banks were also reluctant to lend loan. So, I mean, all of this culminated into, I would say now, a very fierce learning curve. But I think what came in handy was again probably the power of communicating with my stakeholders, explaining the client that, okay, we might incur this delay, getting the workers on board, convincing them that yes, we've got your back, and also at the same time being on phone probably 20.
As someone who worked in sort of logistics at an e-commerce business as well, I was importing goods and selling them in New Zealand, Australia, and importing them from India and China. I can absolutely attest to that. Systems fell apart, and a lot of it was your orders going to be delayed to your customers, to some of your biggest customers. So it was all about communication, about managing expectations. And people were relatively forgiving if you just told them upfront how things are, because every industry was affected like that. So how far along the journey did you get this client? And you said they were ordering 10,000 units a month. How did you step up to be able to supply that amount?
Yeah. So this was, as I mentioned, our first client and became one of the biggest clients. I think that we had to build this relation from early on, trying to convince them of our capabilities and being able to deliver as well. So here, two factors were critical. One, building the trust with them, and you rightly said that at that stage, people were relatively forgiving of the mistakes because everybody was in the same scenario. So one was building trust, and second, also being able to deliver on the promise that you make. So I think, although of course there were minor mistakes which were acceptable, but at the end of the day, it was a business deal. So if they were looking to bank upon us, we had to deliver. So I think once we were able to have a system in place, a system where we not just had workers working during the morning hours, but even in the evening shifts. So eventually, I think after having not just the workers on floor, but we also managed to hire then people who would facilitate them, people who would look for errors, the finding faults in the system, and then they were incentivized to literally fast track the system. So eventually we started with a capacity of about 500 chargers per day. And then we got to about 2,000 per day. To I think about 6 months back, we were about 2,000. So I think adding from one floor then to two floors, and now we have an entire building in Noida, as I mentioned. So building these, I think, relationships from being able to deliver on time was very crucial.
Great. And so you said that you built this relationship from nothing. Would you be able to kind of talk us through, let's say, the key milestones in terms of how you initially approached them, how each of those conversations went? Because they ended up acquiring you. So obviously they were a really big company.
Yeah. So for them, I think it was a phase where they were scaling rapidly and they were looking for more OEMs, and we were able to probably provide them supply at a stage when their existing supplier was not able to fulfill the demand. So I think it was not just our efforts, but I would say also probably the right timing when we were able to pitch in. Initially, we started with conversations about understanding their current product line, what are their requirements. Through some second degree connections, we got in, and then we started with a small scale, and they were happy to give us the first order. I think eventually the only thing which I've seen sustain relationships in the business is when you are able to deliver on the promise.
Great. And over time, were you delivering other products? You started with chargers and you expanded into other products?
Yeah. So here, one of the things we were doing with the charger itself was that the cables was outsourced for us. And gradually we made that in-house also. After doing some cost benefit analysis, we could see that the investments we make into the machine itself, that's called a soldering machine, was probably worth the money, and within a year we would recoup the investment. So we started doing our own components also then in-house, and then we went on to do the mobile phone batteries, and eventually scaled it to entire mobile phone. Now we have a bunch of products as well, right from washing machines to now even refrigerators, a number of things in the factory. And I think here, once we were able to set up and have the SOPs in place, it became very, very systemic. So it required minimal, relatively, observations, oversights, and the systems. I think having right people in the right place helped me kept going, which is what then probably also gave me time to like think of, okay, what else beyond this setup. And since the company we were selling to found value in it, they could very clearly see that we were able to produce things at a lower cost in comparison to the other suppliers. They really saw the value in then acquiring the business and taking the entire charging setup unit and mobile phone assembling unit in-house for them.
And what was the percentage of sales in terms of revenue that you were getting from this single customer?
Okay, so we started with 100% because they were the only client, and we very soon realized that we have to diversify as well, because we were dependent only on this one client. That point in time, we thought, okay, we are selling it to one company. Why not also think about wholesale as well? So that was the point. Then I literally went on shops to shops thinking about, okay, whether this can be the right customer for us, with geography then. And gradually we found more customers. And then from, I think, one contact to another followed. And we were able to get in larger companies as well with different products, different geographies where we could sell, not just directly the companies, but even then to the wholesaler and stockists.
Were you still receiving majority, let's say more than 50% of your revenue from this customer?
I think this was close to 60%, yeah.
Wow. So almost Pareto principle in action over there.
Yeah, 100%.
So technically, this sounds like a very complicated business. Did you do anything else in business? I know you grew up in a business family, but did you do any other business, maybe perhaps growing up like a small business, that kind of prepared you for something of this level?
So quick answer is no, but I've also heard lots of stories where people would do certain things initially growing up and then eventually failing and then succeeding. But in my case, I think this was the first stint. I didn't personally even involve myself in my family business before. So for me, it was the first.
That's amazing. So next question is, what does it mean to be the CEO of a startup to you?
So the buck stops at you. I think that was the biggest charm, but also the pain point, because in job you can still be fine if you do not deliver. In business, everything comes at you finally. So be it decision making around a purchase, or when someone is on leave and that's critical to the business delivery, or even recruitment or training, finances, maintaining relations. So everything finally comes to your desk. So I think that's the upside, and also for some it might be the downside as well.
I think that's often the misconception because people say they want to join a startup to be their own boss, so they will not have accountability to anyone. But the truth is, when you start your own business, you're accountable to everyone. You're accountable to yourself for the for the growth of the business and for achieving everything you set out to achieve. You're accountable to your employees for making sure there's enough money in the business so you can pay them. You're accountable to your sellers. You're accountable to your suppliers, to your customers. I mean, so it's a lot of accountability, and I think it's rare to be in a situation where you really feel like you're free, because actually you're kind of tied to everyone. And that was also my realization in my first business. And it's very overwhelming. And I think it's only for people who are willing to really have that kind of work ethic. It's a marathon, as they say. So you need to have that tireless work ethic, and you need to be okay. You need to be okay knowing that you're essentially charting your own path.
Yeah, I think you're fully right here. Yeah. Especially I found myself in a position when I would never be able to take a leave because I know something or the other would pop up. And even when I'm away, I am still on calls. So I think you're fully right. You're never free essentially. It always was on the back of my mind that, okay, I have to literally give salaries to 60 people whom I hired. So I am literally accountable to every one of them. And my mind is always thinking about, okay, what next? What else can I do? How to expand? What about growth? What about numbers this month? So yeah, I think I fully resonate.
And so I know you're married. How did that affect your relationships? Not necessarily just marriage, but even with your family.
Yeah. So for me personally, it was a very, very positive thing that happened because my partner, she's been very, very supportive. I think, of course, that happens that you're not able to give as much time to your family because you're building a business and it's also like a baby to you. So I think when you have people around you who understand that, yes, your time is probably more invested in your business, that really helps. So for me, it was highly positive.
I think another very positive thing that happened in your business is landing that first client who ended up purchasing you. So, what exactly led to them eventually acquiring you? Because that's kind of everyone's dream is to get acquired. 5 years, you start the business, you sell it off, you get a pretty good paycheck, and then you can move on to the next thing as you did.
Yeah. So for me, it was sort of a two factor essentially played a role. One, that the company was planning an IPO, which also meant that very soon they would have a lot of funds and they would want to probably then grow bigger relatively to show to even their stakeholders and board. And so this was one factor. And second factor was that they saw value in the company itself. As I mentioned, that we were able to build systems in place through which our cost was better compared to the other suppliers for the company. So we were able to actually deliver much better results in much better timeline and even more efficiently. So I think these two factors played a role in actually us getting acquired because the company could clearly see value in our products.
And so, in terms of being a business person or an entrepreneur, were there any mentors or people you looked up to? And how did they influence your journey?
Yeah. So I personally have not had a very sustained mentor, and I rely more on books rather. Of course, there have been times when I would get some advice from one of my previous professors or colleagues at workplace. So that was interim, but a number of books really helped me. One of them was this book by Ben Horowitz. It's called The Hard Thing About the Hard Things, and this was literally very insightful for me because I could see the mistakes that I made and that others also make that the book mentioned about, and then obviously could take upon corrective measures. So I think for me, books have been my mentors.
What daily habits or routines helped you stay focused when you're managing a company in such a competitive industry?
That's interesting, Danny. So I would almost never have a fixed routine for myself. I think at least initially, once I had system in place, of course, then I had a stable routine. But when I was getting started, I would be completely honest here, I was in a mess. There was no fixed time when I would wake up or when I would sleep, or sometimes even in the middle of night I would wake up thinking about, okay, I had to do this. So at least for the first 6 months I had literally no fixed routine. I would start with my emails, checking up, following up, looking at building the team. Hiring, of course, was one of the critical components. So first 6 months, literally no routine. Then when I think I had a good team that I could bank upon, I could then get back to a normal routine of having fixed working hours. Of course, they would, for you as the founder of the company, there are no fixed hours, but then I could relatively be more stable where I could plan my, okay, this is going to be my private time. I have to go out with friends and family. But before that, I think for me, it was never stable.
So, looking back then, is there something you would have done differently with Gabson? And if so, what?
Hmm. I think I would have probably spent more time in hiring. I guess I can never overstate the fact that having good people can make or break your business. if I would have spent probably more time in actually screening profiles and seeing whether the person's values and ambitions match with ours, I might have spent less time in actually solving the problems myself, because then people would have managed it for me. So I think I would have, I would probably spend more time in hiring.
Okay, that's a good lesson to know. So then afterwards, you started Culsac, right? Which is essentially a marketing agency. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're right. So this was the time when I had set up my business in a way where my physical presence was relatively not required. Now that everything was in place, I had managers who could see each and every division. So my frequency of going to factory reduced. So that also meant that I had more time on my calendar. Now, for Culsac, I have always been passionate about helping small businesses and startup founders to grow, because for any small business or specifically a solopreneur, they themselves are a business, because most of the sales would come from the founder itself. The founder is the brand. And I've seen that people have struggled for months and sometimes years building their brand itself. So one quick example, let's say not even an entrepreneur, but let's talk about simply a doctor or an advocate. So for them, they are the brand, right? So they are literally selling their advice, which also meant that people had to rely upon them. And how would people rely upon them? It's generally either through their work experience or someone's suggestion. And now this generally meant that they would take at least about a decade to establish themselves in the market as a reputable leader. So this was the gap we tried to fill in. We would help people market themselves. So essentially, overall, building image around them, showcasing their work in social media platforms. So this was a really passionate project of mine.
And you started this with a co-founder as well?
Yes, this was with the same person I started my first company.
So you basically found, killer team.
I think so. I could rely upon a lot of people for doing the extended work. But of course, the two businesses were completely poles apart. One was manufacturing, required real labor, and another was digital. And most of my team was based remotely.
Do you feel like maybe manufacturing business was quite stressful and tricky to manage, and that's why you ended up going for a remote business and a marketing business as well?
I don't think so, actually. I think every business you're in, especially if you're a founder, it's as messy, as stressful, or as complicated as it can get if you have a large team. Because even if, let's compare having a manufacturing facility where you have physical presence of all the people versus when your team is remote. Now, you might think that, okay, having a physical presence is important, but I think it's probably equally important or critical when you don't have any sight of your employees. So the team was based remotely. We literally had just 3 people in the office, and managing that, making sure that people are delivering rather than probably sometimes moonlighting, was a key challenge, which is also a key challenge in the digital marketing industry, because a lot of people do freelancing, be it your graphic designers or editors, cinematographers. This is an industry which is heavily dominated by freelance work. So I think Culsac, again, being in digital marketing space, was, if not less, but definitely equally challenging.
So how did you ensure, for example, the employees you were hiring were not moonlighting as well?
So I never found a clear way out. I think this was a challenge which exists for almost everyone who is in this industry. And the only thing generally people tend to do, which we did as well, is to have most of the salary linked with incentives, linked with the work that they deliver. So there's no clear path how you can limit the people from doing freelance work. So yeah, I think it has to be either tied with the mission or with the incentives. And we try to do a mix of both.
And I feel like if they're meeting the incentives, it's fine if they're doing a few hours extra here and there, as long as the organization's goals are being fulfilled.
Yeah, you fully.
Then when exactly did you start Culsac? And you mentioned before that you ended up exiting it as well. How did that whole journey go?
Yeah, so Culsac was, informally going on since, I guess, about 2021. But if I recall correctly, we established the company as a separate entity in 22. And this was when we already have had a few clients we were supporting informally with a bunch of freelancers again. Then when we thought that, okay, this is a space we might even get started full time, we built a team, we set up a company. And as I said, the company, the most of the employees were remote. The entire company was eventually working for clients which were based all over the country. And yeah, I guess 2022 was the time when we started that. And about exiting, so I moved outside India to Ireland, and therefore I had relatively less time, also because of time difference. I could not dedicate as much time, so I planned an exit. Also, business school was on my mind, so I thought, okay, probably this is the right time. The company is still going on, the team is still working. It's just that I exited in order to then start my business school journey.
So this leads us perfectly to the next question. What are you looking for in terms of the next startup?
Okay, I wish I had an answer. So I think for me, having worked in different spheres, in different setups, it more gave me a sense of what I don't want to do versus what I want to do next. What I know is, of course, I want to build another company, hopefully during my MBA itself. And I'm actively looking for like-minded people, potential co-founders, to then start another stint. So for me, it's mostly that I'm inclined towards building something in tech, probably fintech, and which might be something in business to consumer space rather than business to business space, which is something I guess excites me more when I'm seeing the results directly on the customer itself.
And how has the MBA journey so far shaped your career decisions and outlook on entrepreneurship?
Okay, this has been fantastic for me. I think being surrounded by 500 self-motivated people, as MBA filters everyone who gets in. So I guess being surrounded by such brilliant people from all over the world has motivated me, in fact, inspired me for sure about the things that people are building all across the world, how a lot of people are inclined to start up during their MBA. A lot of people had previous startups, including yourself, Clara, who was here previously. I think this space just inspires you. So LBS for me has surpassed all my expectations. The resources that the campus has, so it's every day for me is a charm in itself.
And I'm actually very excited to see what your next startup would be as well, because it sounds like you're already on a really, really great path and your momentum's just building up. So we'll finish off with some rapid fire questions. So what is one book you'd recommend every entrepreneur should read?
Thinking fast, thinking slow. It gets you thinking. It gets you aware, at least the way you think and make decisions. It's either because of your preconceived notions about, or it's just very instinctive. So I think the book will make you aware about, okay, how you think, and then probably you need to sometimes take a step back and think rationally rather than instinctively.
Yeah, and that book's by Daniel Kahneman, and I can think of at least 2 or 3 lecturers from LBS who would be very happy that you mentioned it in this podcast.
100%.
So what's one misconception people have about running or starting a startup?
That you have to be the sector expert if you're starting something in that business. I think I've seen this time and again, especially we're surrounded by people who worked in or want to work in venture capital, and VCs have this thing common, okay, why you? And which sometimes is in some shape or the other a question of whether you have expertise in that domain or not, or experience. But for me, I haven't had manufacturing experience. I have never built a digital marketing product or even worked in the space, but I think having worked there, I'm fully confident that you don't have to have sector expertise. This has been true for a lot of people, be it Elon Musk or you name it, essentially. A lot of people are not from sector, so you don't have to have sector expertise. I think you can just build it over time and also have people who can do it for you.
Great answer, and delivered by the perfect example as well. If you could give one piece of advice to your past self at the start of your entrepreneurship journey, what would that be?
Fail fast. Don't hesitate to let certain things go. I think we have this habit of when we are trying to build something, it ought to be the best. But sometimes when every signal around you is saying, okay, this might not work, probably that's the time to pivot as well. So don't hesitate to fail, but fail fast so that then you can move on.
And what's next for you outside of work? Are there any personal goals or projects that you're working on?
I'm just evaluating a bunch of ideas at this stage. Therefore, super happy to meet people at LBS or otherwise from outside who are also keen in building something. I'm sector agnostic to much extent. I'm just looking forward to great ideas and see how I can probably contribute. And something that I'm really enjoying is attending all your events, the ones organized by Entrepreneurial Club. I haven't missed any, and I think that just says about the great work that the club does at LBS.
Thanks, Abbas. So, where can listeners follow your journey and stay connected?
I am relatively active on LinkedIn. I am not available on any other social media platforms. I'm not on Insta, but yeah, LinkedIn can be one place where you can find me.
And we'll put a link on that on our YouTube and other channels as well. It's been a pleasure, Abbas. I'm so glad this happened. I'm looking forward to seeing what else you go on to do in entrepreneurship.
Thanks. Pleasure's all mine. Enjoyed the conversation, Danny.
Thanks, Abbas. Take care.
Okay.